Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. For those of you who are following me religiously, and I know so many of you are, you probably have already seen my video about the Corporate Transparency Act. That again was the law enacted January 1st, 2024. In a nutshell, requires a certain amount of companies or entities to report to the Department of the Treasury, their financial crimes unit, the ownership for those different entities or companies. There's a video out there that I did prior to this, has a lot of detail on that. I'll hit some of this at the end here, but here's what's really important is we just got a pretty big update on the impact of the Corporate Transparency Act. And a federal judge in Alabama just recently, March 1st, just ruled that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional. So what does that mean? Well, in this case, it just means that the plaintiffs in the case do not have to report their beneficial ownership information to FinCen, as the Corporate Transparency Act requires. Now, in this specific case, the plaintiff is an individual, and then it is the National Small Business Association. So those are the two parties that the case in Alabama applies to. What's unclear right now is if the ruling applies to all of the National Small Business Administration's members, of which I think there's like 65,000 members. So we don't know if it applies to all the members or just the organization itself in the individual plaintiff. So we're hoping to get some clarification on that. What else does that mean? So one, if you are not one of those two parties at least, so if you're an LLC here in Ohio that's not a member of the National Small Business Association, then it doesn't apply to you. It means you're still governed by the Corporate Transparency Act. So we are expecting that there will be an appeal. We think the U.S. government will appeal the ruling, obviously to see if the CTA will be upheld or if this federal judge in Alabama, if their ruling will stand. So we'll find out there. Number two, I would definitely expect what we call copycat cases to be filed. So we'll probably see these around the country in all the different federal courts where small business associations or individual business owners are going to file suits stating that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional for the same reasons that it was found unconstitutional in the Alabama case, which for you legal nerds out there, the judge said that the CTA exceeded the Constitution's limits on the legislative branch, and it failed the necessary and proper test. So I'm sure that's an answer to a law school exam that's already getting drafted out there. So I would look for cases like this popping up across the U.S. and the rest of the federal courts. And we should get some comments or some reaction from FinCen as well, just to hear what they have to say. But we will definitely stay tuned to see how that applies. Now, for the rest of us, the Corporate Transparency Act requires that we report the names of our companies, mailing address, tax ID number, things of that nature, the identities and names of all of our beneficial owners. So that means our obvious owners, right? The folks that actually own the companies have to report their information, name, some sort of tax ID number, passport number, driver's license number, copy of their ID, that kind of thing, mailing address, got to be an actual mailing address, can't be a P.O. box. And you have to report all their information, but also folks who maybe are not owners in title, but they have what's called the ability to indirectly or directly control the company. So officers, senior executives, folks that are major decision makers, family consultants, you can see it's a pretty broad brush that's been painted. So all of those folks, you're going to have to report their information. And then finally, applicants, so whoever set up the company. As I mentioned before, in Ohio, I set up companies for clients, and so my name shows up as the incorporator, or in this case, the applicant. So for those folks, my information would have to be reported as well. My name, my business address, and then will ultimately be my FinCen number, because I'll just apply for a FinCen number rather than continue to use individual numbers for that. Why does this matter so much? Well, for those folks who set up a new company on January 1st, 2024 or later, you are starting to come up on the 90-day window. You had 90 days to register your beneficial ownership information and your applicant information and your company information with FinCen through their portal. You had 90 days from the day that your entity, your company, was approved by the Secretary of State. So, again, January, February, March, end of March is that 90-day deadline. So that's going to start rolling up here on us pretty quickly, and you want to be aware of that. You don't want to miss that. As I've mentioned before, the civil penalties are pretty significant. So we're talking up to $500 a day. Criminal penalties are also pretty bad, right? Up to $10,000, 2 years in prison. So you want to avoid those penalties, which means you need to be getting ready to register your company. So if you set up multiple companies, multiple entities, where are my real estate investors at, right? We know how that goes, right? Shell companies and sister companies and all that. You probably need to get a decent audit put together that reflects all the different names of your companies, different tax ID numbers, principal office addresses, mailing addresses, applicant information, and who owns those companies, especially if you got some joint ventures or different things like that out there. So I start putting that together now so that you're prepared, whether it's the end of March, beginning of April, depending upon when your 90-day window starts. Be ready to file that information, again, through FinCen's portal. If you are not going to do it on your own, then make sure you get it to your attorney ahead of time so that they can review it, figure out if there's any questions that need to be answered, holes that need to be filled, that kind of thing, and get it registered in a timely fashion. So obviously, this type of court case, this ruling that we saw in Alabama, is going to cause a lot of questions about folks who are coming up on their 90-day window. What do you do? Well, unless you have a court ruling that directly impacts you, then the recommendation is comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. Make sure you're ready to register the information that's required to be registered, and you do it in a timely fashion. Talk to your attorneys, talk to your business advisors, your your executive team. Try to figure out, who your beneficial owners are, who your major decision makers are. Make sure you've collected all their information and you're prepared to report it. But in the meantime, keep an eye on how this shakes out. What we may see at some level is a broader stay or suspension of the law that would then allow you to hold off on registering any information until, frankly, this gets decided probably by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point down the road. So obviously it'd be great if we had some better direction and guidance that would allow us to cleanly tell you, hey, don't worry about reporting anything until the Supreme Court were to issue some sort of ruling, but we're not there yet. So right now we're in quasi no man's land. If you're a plaintiff in that Alabama case, guess what? You don't have to report until the appellate court rules that you have to, or the Supreme Court does. For the rest of us, be prepared to report. Again, if you set up a company January 1st, 2024 or later. Remember, if you set up a company prior to January 1st, 2024, so it was already in existence, you have until January 1, 2025 to report, so we've got some time to see how this shakes out. And then, of course, if you set up a company after January 1, 2025, at that point you'll have 30 days. So hopefully we've got it ironed out and the courts have told us what we're supposed to do before we get to that point. Do remember the caveat. If you happen to be one of those companies who's required to report at that 90-day window, and then you have a change in your ownership, you then have 30 days to update that information. So you can see how this can kind of, snowball pretty quickly. But definitely something to be aware of. Be talking to your legal advisor, your legal team, your CPAs, making sure that you understand what your requirements are and that you're prepared to report them. So stay tuned. We'll let you know once we hear more on some of these cases, and good luck out there.